Good afternoon and welcome to Foreigndesk on Benue television. I am Winifred Yusul. On the headlines, Afghanistan's Taliban celebrates 3 years in power with military parade. Japan lifts warning of potential megaquake. Plus, Ukraine's president says incursion into Russia's Kursk region achieving strategic goals. Afghanistan's Taliban has celebrated 3 years in power with a military parade, paying homage to its homemade bombs, fighter aircraft, and goose-stepping security forces. The Taliban's armed forces toured Soviet-era tanks and artillery pieces through Bagram, the former United States air base, where Chinese and Iranian diplomats were among hundreds who gathered for the parade and speeches. The airbase served as the linchpin for the U.S.-led operations against the Taliban for 2 decades. Recall that Taliban forces seized Kabul on August 15, 2021, after the U.S.-backed government collapsed and its leaders fled into exile. The anniversary is marked a day earlier on the Afghan calendar. The Taliban government remains unrecognized by any other state, with restrictions on women, who bear the brunt of policies the United Nations has called gender apartheid, remaining a key sticking point. Prime Minister Mohammed Akhud, who had been scheduled to appear at Bagram, praised the Taliban authorities' victory over those he called Western occupiers. He said the Taliban government has the responsibility to maintain Islamic rule, protect property, people's lives, and the respect of Afghanistan. While many Afghans expressed relief at the end of 40 years of successive conflict, the economy remains stagnant and the population mired in a worsening humanitarian crisis. A joint statement from international non-governmental groups warned of the growing aid funding gap, with 23.7 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. Women have been squeezed from public life, banned from many jobs as well as parks and gyms, and barred from secondary and higher education. According to analysts, security has been a priority for Taliban authorities. We apologize for that break. Now moving forward, Japan has lifted its warning about a potential megaquake 1 week after it was issued. The warning told people to be alert but not evacuate, saying the probability of a major earthquake was higher than usual, but it was not imminent. The Japanese government said it was no longer asking people to take special precautions and they were free to go back to normal lifestyle. Following the warning, thousands of Japanese people cancelled planned trips and stocked up on essentials, while some high-speed rail travel was also affected. The Japan Meteorological Agency said it had detected a no seismic activity, indicating any concerning changes in the presumed area where the mega quake could originate. Disaster Management Minister Yoshifumi Musumura said while last week's warning has been lifted, the risk of a major earthquake is still present. He said no abnormalities had been detected in seismic activities and crustal deformation, so the call for increased preparedness was lifted. Experts were put on heightened alert because the epicenter sat at the edge of the Nankai Trough, an area of seismic activities which stretches along Japan's Pacific coast. The plate boundary sits between Suruga Bay in central Japan and the Hyunganada Sea in Koshu to the south. After last week's warning, some shops were reportedly left with empty shelves or forced to put limits on purchases of items like bottled water. More than 100 Liberal Party candidates will be unable to run for council in Australia's most populous state after a monumental stuff-up saw the party miss on election nomination deadline. New South Wales NLSW officials say they legally cannot accept late entries, with one of Australia's top election analysts estimating the party is likely to lose about 50 council seats as a result. Several long-serving politicians will automatically be out of a job, and constituents of 8 councils will not have a single Liberal Party candidate to vote for. State Party Director Richard Shields, who has apologized and blamed limited resources for the failure to complete paperwork in time. In a letter to members of parliament, the party's state parliamentary leader Mark Speakman described the episode as probably the worst act of mismanagement in the party's history, saying Mr. Shields could have asked for more resources. Election analyst Ben Rue says the exact number of contests affected is still to be confirmed, but he calculates the Liberal Party is 136 candidates short of a full ticket. In a post, he said those who have missed the ballot include 38 sitting councillors. Current councillor Paul L., who was planning to run for mayor of the Shoalhaven City Council in the state's south, is among those set to lose their position. In Wollongong, about 90 kilometers south of Sydney, the error has effectively ended the 13-year council career of John Dorahi, but he is still hopeful officials will demonstrate some level of leniency. A Russian court has sentenced Kisian Kremlina to 12 years in jail for treason for donating $51 to a charity supporting Ukraine. Karolina, who has American and Russian citizenship, pleaded guilty last week after a trial held behind closed doors. She had been living in Los Angeles and became a U.S. citizen in 2021. She was arrested during a family visit last January in Yekaterinburg, about 1,600 kilometers east of Moscow. Prosecutors had sought a 15-year jail term. The court in in Yekaterinburg found her guilty of high treason and sentenced her to imprisonment in a general regime penal colony. Karelina had been accused by Russia's FSB security service of raising money for a Ukrainian organization providing arms to Ukrainian military. Russian human rights activists said a single transfer of $51.80 had been made on the first day of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 22, 2022. Her lawyer, Mikhail Mushilov, said Karelina had only admitted transferring the money, believing the funds would help victims on both sides. He told newsmen that she would appeal against the sentence. The charity Razom for Ukraine said earlier this year it was appalled to hear of Karelina's arrest and denied raising money for weapons or ammunition. It said it was a US-funded charity focused on humanitarian aid and disaster relief. Russian authorities have clamped down on dissent and human rights groups, say more than 1,000 criminal cases have been opened against anti-war dissidents. Russian authorities have been evacuating thousands of civilians from the Kursk region as Ukrainian forces advance after a surprise incursion aimed at compelling Moscow to slow its progress along the rest of the front lines. Kursk acting governor Alexei Smirnov said the Glushkovo district, which has a population of 20,000 and is 20 kilometers from the front, was being evacuated on Thursday. According to Russian officials, at least 200,000 people have so far been moved from the border regions. Russia's Ministry of Defense on Thursday said that its forces had shot down Ukrainian drones over the neighboring Belgorod region, and Sukhoi 34 bombers had pounded Ukrainian positions in Kursk. The ministry also said its troops had taken better positions at several points to fight against what Ukraine described as carving out a buffer zone to protect its population against attacks. Ukraine's Air Force said they shot down all 29 drones Russians launched overnight as the Russian military announced the deployment of fighter jets to the western border. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has ordered huge financial incentives for any conscripts joining the army, such as bonuses, initial large payments, preferential mortgages. Ukraine's military spokesman Dmytro Lakhovy said Russia has moved some troops from Ukraine's occupied south to some areas, but it has not constituted a big redeployment for now. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said an incursion into the Russian region of Kursk has been achieving its strategic goals. In a post on Telegram, Zelensky said Ukrainian troops had advanced between 1 and 2 kilometers in various areas of Russia throughout the day. He said 100 Russian soldiers had been captured in the surprise invasion, which began last week. In his nightly address, Zelensky called the operation a good advance while appealing to Western allies to allow Ukrainian forces to use long-range missiles they have provided to strike targets deeper into Russia. Western officials have largely resisted those appeals for fear of a wider escalation. Meanwhile, the Russian border region of Belgorod, which borders Kursk to the south, declared a state of emergency. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov described the situation there as extremely difficult and tense, saying attacks had destroyed homes and caused civilian casualties on varying locals. Gladkov said on his Telegram channel that children were being moved to safety, adding that about 5,000 children were in camps in safe areas. He said the previous day that approximately 11,000 people had fled their homes, with about 1,000 staying in temporary accommodation centers. With fear of the humanitarian toll growing, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Arnaud Verenchko said Kyiv should open humanitarian corridors for the evacuation of civilians, but in the direction of Russia and in the direction of Ukraine. She said Kyiv should also arrange access for international humanitarian organizations, likely to include the International Committee on the Red Cross and the United Nations. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back shortly with more stories. Do stay with us. Welcome. President of Columbia University, Munawcher Shafik, has announced her resignation after a tumultuous year marked by tensions with staff and students over her handling of campus protests against the war in Gaza. The university announced her departure in a statement on its website. In a letter to the university staff and students, Shafik said that this period has taken a considerable toll on her family, as it has for others in the community. She stated that it has been a period of turmoil where it has been difficult to overcome divergent views across the community. Co-chairs of the university's Board of Trustees, David Greenberg and Clara Shipman, said they understood and respected her decision. Protests against the Gaza war began on Columbus, New York City campus in April, inspiring similar encampments at other institutions across the United States. As the protests gathered momentum, Shafik was summoned to a congressional meeting over allegations the university had failed to protect students and staff from raising anti-Semitism. The next day, she allowed New York City police onto the campus to clear the protests, and about 100 people were arrested, triggering outrage from protesters and some academics and calls for her resignation. Tensions rose further at the end of April when police returned again to campus, arresting some 300 people and removing the encampment. Shafik's resignation was welcomed by some of the protesters as well, those who had accused her of allowing anti-Semitism to flourish. The trustees and Katrina Armstrong would step in as Columbia's interim president. Armstrong is currently the chief executive officer of the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Climate activists glue themselves to the torments of 4 airports in Germany, briefly bringing traffic to a halt at 2 of them before being arrested. Activist group Last Generation said 8 people had entered the taxiways of College Bonn, Nuremberg, Berlin, and Stuttgart airports on Thursday, unfurling banners and sticking themselves to the asphalt. The group is demanding that the German government negotiate and sign an agreement guaranteeing a global exit for the use of oil, gas, and coal by 2030. The activists did not enter the main runways but disrupted flights for about 2 hours at Nuremberg and College Bonn owing to police operations. 2 activists had attached themselves to the ground at each airport. At Berlin and Stuttgart, 4 activists who had stuck themselves to the ground were quickly removed by police, and air operations were not affected. Police confirmed that all 8 activists involved in the protest were arrested. Interior Minister Nancy Faeser condemned the action, saying such actions are dangerous. She pointed to legislation approved by the German cabinet last month that would impose tougher penalties on people who break through airport parameters. Last Generation is known for mounting eye-catchy protests, from throwing mashed potatoes at paintings in museums to gluing themselves onto busy roads. In July, activists from the group halted traffic for 2 hours during the busy summer holiday season by gluing themselves to the tarmac at Germany's busiest airport, Frankfurt. Tens of thousands of women in West Bengal state marched through the streets on Wednesday night in protest against the rape and murder of a trainee doctor at a state-run hospital in Kolkata last week. The night march was the culmination of nearly a week of frenzied protest ignited by the brutal killing of the 31-year-old at the RG Kar Medical College last Friday. After a grueling 36-hour shift, she had fallen asleep in a seminar room due to the lack of a designated rest area. The next morning, her colleagues discovered her half-naked body on the podium, bearing extensive injuries. A hospital volunteer worker has been arrested in connection with the crime. Responding to calls on social media, women from all walks of life marched across Kolkata city and throughout the state on a rainy Wednesday night. Though protests were largely peaceful, they were marred by clashes between the police and a small group of unidentified men who barged into the RG Kar Hospital, the site of the doctor's murder, and ransacked the emergency department. Police fired tear gas to disperse the unruly crowd. Some police vehicles were also damaged. Smaller protests were also held in many other Indian cities like Delhi, Hyderabad, Mumbai, and Pune. It was not the first time that at a Reclaim the Night march has been staged in India. Inspired by similar marches elsewhere in the world by women to assert their right to work in public areas without fear, a march was held in 1978 in Bombay, now Mumbai, in protest against the rape of a woman on the street. Blank Noise, a community-based art project and activist collective, has organized several midnight walks in Delhi to encourage women to assert their right to work freely at night. That's all we have for you on Foreigndesk. But before we go, let's take a recap of our top stories. Afghanistan's Taliban has celebrated 3 years in power with military parade. We told you Japan has lifted warning of potential megaquake. Plus, we informed you that Ukraine's president has said incursion into Russia's Kursk region achieving strategic goals. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Winifred Yusu. Keep watching Benue Television and have a good day.